Thank you so much, Violetta, as always. And I think the way that you've described the amalgam of Patria Siembra and World Balance, I don't think we can do as good a job as what you've already done. But we will, of course, try. We will share with everyone what we have been doing with Patria Siembra, which is a project that we've been running, assisting with, I would like to say, in the country of Cuba. And before we talk about that, a little bit of a backstory of how all of that connects with eco-civilization is that last January in 2023, on Violetta's birthday, Violetta, me, and I can see another dear friend of ours, Deirdre, who's also here. The three of us were actually in Cuba attending a conference which was called the World Balance Conference. I think that conference really helped humanize all three of us more than we were by making us realize the importance of conversations and the importance of society and all these things that we keep talking about, but actually seeing it in action in front of us for those five odd days that the conference ran, where every individual who was there as a human being, exactly what Dr. Nini was talking about, that they were a human being first, and then they were all these various other things that they were, but that all was irrelevant because when we came together, we were talking about our world, we were talking about challenges, we were talking about solutions as human beings, right? And which was wonderful for us to experience. Between the conversations we had, Violetta, Deirdre, and I, we just realized that Cuba as a country is really it's primed to allow for these conversations to happen just by the very nature of how they have progressed over the last 50 to 60 odd years, how their society has progressed, what they prioritize, and so on and so forth, right? And this whole understanding of Patria Siembra and world balance being two parts of the same story really came from an understanding of their society, for which my colleague who's here will be taking us through her journey in Cuba, where she spent almost about 10 odd months now, since after Violetta, Deirdre, and I came back, talking to the people in Cuba, learning from them, and then coming here to share our learnings and her learnings with all of you about Patria Siembra and what it is and where it began from and where it's reached right now and all of that. So, and you'll see the connections with soil, with water, and all of that as she tells you of her experiences and her learnings. So, Karthika, over to
Right.
you.
I'd like to start by saying that I had spoken to Violetta, Deidra, and even Ramit before going to Cuba, but I am not the kind of person who could completely buy into everything that they said. And honestly, I had my reasons because the things that they were actually saying was something I, as an individual who like grew up in a city, could not truly understand or even believe, to be honest. And I think for me, then going to Cuba was I went in with the assumption that I'd be doing some work in Cuba, but I think it was just about me becoming a better human being as I was than I was before. And that's what I keep telling people that every time I come back from Cuba, I feel like I'm a better version of myself. And that only happens because of the small things, and we don't often notice it, but they're so important. So a very good example for me would be in Cuba when I would like sit and work and there'd be other members of my team who'd just come in and talk. The first question they'd ask, and this is a question every Cuban would ask you, is, hello, how are you? And of course, we ask these questions every day to everybody, but how many of us are actually looking for the answer? Because one thing that I was very sure is that every Cuban wanted an answer. And they were not just looking for, oh, everything is fine. Because then they'll go on and ask about, oh, did you eat today? Or could you get a workout in? Because they figured that I like doing that. And it was just the humanity, that the spirit of humanity that was so strong in that community, which which said that there's something so much more special. So it's very similar to what Violetta mentioned earlier. We are here to invoke something that we have within ourselves, and we seem to have forgotten. And I think when I went to Cuba, that's what they invoked the humanity in me. And this is important for me to tell you because this is how the work that we're doing also kind of came about. So the first project that we did in Cuba actually was called Patria Libros. So it was a digital library which our aim was to provide open access knowledge of material literature, Cuban literature to the world. But I mean, even though today Patria Libros is the largest digital library Cuba has for Cuban literature, I think for us the most important part was that everybody, all even national institutions to small household provincial libraries, were more than happy to give us the literature that they had. They've been working on some things for years and they were just ready to give it away because they understood the value of sharing, of giving, of being of help to another individual. Because they don't see a difference between them as individuals and the society. It's I am because you are, and I think that fundamentally changed the way personally I saw the world, and I think with extension to that, the way we functioned in Cuba as well. And while I mean, as Ramit mentioned, I ended up staying there for a good 8 to 10 months, and during that time, the one thing that continued to bother me was the things that they are the material limitations that or the material challenges that the people of Cuba had to face only because they were so much in contradiction with the world, with the way the world functions. So for them, it doesn't really matter if if they're earning enough, but it matters to them if everybody around them is happy, right? And they're facing a lot of material challenges right now, and I'm not going to get into that because it might be a completely different talk altogether. But certain key indicators that I noticed with the fact that we couldn't find as much groceries or vegetables or fruits in the market because of the blockade or other economic issues and limitations that they are facing. And during this time, I was constantly meeting a lot of people. And I came across this very dear friend of mine. She lives in Playa, which is a province near Havana. And while we were in a work meeting, after that, she said, "Hey, do you like mangoes?" I mean, of course, it was not the most usual question you hear after a work meeting, but I was living there alone and I was not going to say no to free mangoes. And I said yes. And she took me to her house, and in her backyard, I think I saw one of the most beautiful gardens that I've seen. And the garden had everything. It had beans, it had every sort of vegetable that I could think of, it had fruits, it had a dog, it had a rabbit, it had a chicken, and this was in the middle of the city. And I think it opened my eyes in many ways because back then my first question to her was, "Oh, what is the startup cost of this thing? How much money did it really take you to build this?" And she looked at me in the most puzzled manner. And she said, I just brought groceries for my family and just sowed the seeds in my backyard. And that is when I realized how easy it can be for us to be in sync with nature. How easy it can be to be in sync with the elements around us. But we're constantly forcing ourselves to be enslaved to this system that's artificial, that's constructed, and then dealing with all the negative consequences afterwards. And I say this sitting in a city. We are in Delhi right now, so we say this sitting in a city which has crossed 50 degrees this month, which is the hottest we've ever been. And that's where Patria Siembra started. So we knew that we wanted to do something about food security. We wanted to do something about just getting people back to the soil, getting people back to nature. And we just started, reaching out to friends. I'm not going to say this is like a massive movement, but it was just about reaching out to friends. And now we have a network of close to 150 people in and around Havana who come together, who share resources. And by resources, I don't just mean, seeds or saplings, which they actually do, but I also mean they share solidarity, they share support. And in times when things seem hopeless and things seem difficult, they tell each other that it's going to be fine, and they're here and they're not alone. And I think that adds so much value to the conversations we end up having. And another thing that we did realize through all of this is that human resilience did exist there already. I don't think Ramit or me had to actually go to Cuba to actually develop that. It already existed. All we needed to do was just see it for ourselves and learn from it. And that is exactly what we're trying to do with the World Balance Conference, which is coming as well. So in next year, in January 2025, when all of us are going to be there, and I hope I see most of you, all of you actually, there as well, we want to talk about the kind of stories we've heard through Patria Siembra. And just to give people a little bit of an idea about the kind of stories I'm talking about, I once went to a province, a nearby province in Havana, and there's something called the Chair of Elderly. So it's a branch under the University of Havana where elderly people above the age of, say, 60, 70 are allowed to continue their education and have seminars where they can, do their own PhD or masters. And it was one of those meetings where a dear friend of mine invited me and wanted me to talk about these ideas. And I actually went on, I talked a bit about how we can grow fruits and vegetables in our balconies, in our terrace, and all of that. And then after me going on for about 10 minutes, I said, you know what? I mean, you have way more experience than I could ever have. I would really want to hear from you. And a 95-year-old man stood up and he had a paper in his hand and he started reading out all the plants that he has sown, all the plants that he has in his backyard. So he started talking about the brinjals, the potatoes, the beans, and then he went on to tomato. And then he says that when I wanted to start sowing tomatoes, there weren't tomatoes in the market because it's quite difficult to get access to that sort of groceries in Cuba. So I waited for my son who was coming back from Florida, and he had a sandwich that he had bought in the airport. And in that sandwich was a tomato seed, which I then sowed. And it was, and now he has like an entire bush of tomatoes, which he like gives to uses in his kitchen. But what happened after that is what truly made me understand the value of even small actions or the sheer human resilience, which was the fact that the next day the friend who had invited me sent me a picture of 10 saplings which that man had donated to his neighborhood, and now everybody in the neighborhood could have tomatoes without having to go to the market. And it
Wow.
was so simple for them to see, and so difficult for me personally, to have even imagined sitting in where I was coming from. And it was those small things which open your eyes to how the world can be. So during the World Balance Conference, we are having more people like these, and there are countless stories in Cuba, around Cuba, and from all over the world who are coming together to share what just sheer will, resilience, and kindness and compassion can do. So I really, really hope, and this time Ecocivilisation is also having a space within the conference. So it's a perfect time for all of us to get together to not just exchange ideas, but to figure out ways to what we need to actually do to make sure that we live and leave a world which is better for all of us.